Well, hi there, this is Sandy Allnock, and since I am in Europe, hopefully looking at some beautiful stained glass in old churches, I thought I'd leave some stained glass behind for you. I'm making a stained glass background using some clearly besotted stamps. This is the Elegant Butterflies set, and it has a variety of sizes of butterflies, which is perfect for this technique. And I'm just going to stamp, to start off with, some random large butterflies. You could use flowers with this. A lot of different types of stamps would lend themselves well to this, and I have lots of ideas running through my head of different stamps in my collection that I could try this with as well. So I'm going to stamp a number of them on here. Depending on what ink you're stamping with, you want to be able to emboss them. So if your ink stays really wet and your pad is really juicy, you can wait and stamp more butterflies before you stop to do some embossing. My pad isn't all that juicy, and I don't know how long this ink is going to stay wet. This is the Ranger Archival Jet Black, and I want to make sure that it embosses well. The reason that we want it embossed, if you're going to do the watercolor technique that I show you, is because we want to create little pools of area for the color to sit in. So that's why we want the raised areas of the embossing to happen. If you're going to use another medium, if you're going to use Copic markers or colored pencils or something, then you can use whatever ink works with those mediums, and you don't have to do the embossing if you're not going to do this watercolor thing that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. So I'm just filling in with a different butterfly shape. There's several different ones, and I'm not really a butterfly girl, but boy, this stamp set really turned me into a butterfly girl because I can see lots of different ways to use them and color them. And I have been doing so. I've been sneaking them into some of my art journal pages and things because they're just so pretty. Here I'm filling in with the teeny tiny butterflies to break up some of those open shapes. So next, dual brush pens from Tombow. You can use any of the water-based markers, but these come in such bright colors in this new bright set, and I really liked the jewel toneness of them all, and I thought that would be really pretty on a panel of stained glass. For mine, I've attached it to this little cutting board with some micropore tape to hold it still, but depending on what your medium is, again, you don't have to tape it down. I'm not going to need the entire panel, so I let my tape cover up some of the stamping, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough of the butterflies going underneath of the area that I'm going to need, because I'm going to put a panel over top of it. So that's why I continued stamping to the outside edge of the paper, even though I don't really need to color all that, and I'm going to trim off some of that anyway so that it'll fit perfectly on my card. You can see I'm not being careful with the coloring here, just throwing some colors into each one of those sections. You can do each butterfly by color and do a red one and a pink one and a yellow one and an orange one. You can do mixed colors like I'm doing here, whatever kind of color scheme you want. I think there's lots of possibilities for doing them in completely different ways that would be gorgeous, and you could even get your kids to color these for you. When I was a little kid, I remember seeing some of those really detailed coloring books that had all those little teeny tiny things to color, and I was in heaven. So your kids might enjoy this. The next step is to spray it, and I'm going to spray with some water in a mister. And you don't want to spray too much because you don't want those wells to fill up and then overflow into another, because if you get 3 or 4 colors blending together, they'll turn into brown, and you don't really want them to turn into brown. You want to keep them in their own little contained areas and let them mix with just the other colors that are in their sections. This is all done on Hero Art's letterpress paper, which is not watercolor paper, but it works well with watercolor stuff. And it really does a super job with dry embossing, which is what it's meant for. But it's really inexpensive, and if you wanted to try some, it's a little treat for yourself to try a paper with just a little different surface than some of the other papers you might have known before. There will be links in the description to all of the supplies needed for this kind of a background card. So I'm heat setting it, and you can either let it air dry or heat set it. I wanted to make sure some of those colors didn't continue to morph over into brown. And I wanted to do another step on this. You could stop the card here, but I wanted to put clear embossing over the whole thing because I wanted to really make it look like glass, but I didn't want to get my pad all dirty, my Versamark pad. So I put the ink onto my craft mat, and I didn't think there was enough ink on it, so because my pad is a little on the dry side, so I used my Embossing dabber, and I put a bunch of the embossing ink onto the craft mat, because then my ink pad and my dabber stay nice and clean, but I still get to put that color or that stickiness onto my card, onto this background, so that I can emboss it. And I'm just going to put the embossing powder over the whole thing and emboss and heat emboss it. And you can see it's going to create this really great kind of glassy look to it. You can stop at one layer of embossing and you'll get sort of that raised texture of the butterflies you stamped and embossed first, plus this other embossing. Or you can go crazy like me, and what I did was add a bunch of layers of the embossing. So while embossing powder is hot, you can put another coat of it on, and it'll stick to anything that is warm enough for it to stick to, and you don't have to re-ink it. So I'm just going to keep going on this with layer after layer, and you can kind of see it's starting to build up a little bit and starting to pool a little bit on top of all of that ink, which is really going to be prettier and prettier and prettier. So you can stop at any point that you like it, but you can almost see here, yeah, there you go. See how smooth it's getting over in some of those sections? So I want the entire middle to be that thick, because the middle section is what I'm going to need for my card. So I'm not going to worry about the outside edges. So next, the card assembly itself. I'm going to use Pretty Pink Posh's Stitched Duo 2 that came out last month, and I'm going to use that on the panel on the front, and it's going to cover up the outside edges of that embossing, and it's going to be popped. It's only 4 inches wide, so I'll get a little bit of the card base showing from behind, and I wanted to pop it, and I wanted it to be really stable, so I cut a long strip of the foam tape to run down each side, and I'll do the same thing on the top and the bottom, because that'll assure that it will stay really stable. I don't want it to kind of wobble and feel like it's sagging into the card. So there's, I just want to make it really crisp. So here is the back of the piece that I just did all that crazy embossing on, and you can see it's pretty curled, and I wanted to make sure it really, really, really stays in place. So not only am I using a really heavy card base, using the Nina 110, but I'm also going to put a ton of score tape on this. Score tape is probably the best sticky stuff that I know. There's that extreme adhesive, but even that is not as sticky as score tape. So if you ever need something to really, really stay put, just remember you can't peel it back up after you stick it down, because this stuff is not moving once it gets onto whatever you're sticking it to. So just peel off all of that tape backing, and this panel will be ready to pop on the card. And all I have to do is make sure I leave that little 1/8 of an inch on either side of it clean, so that I don't have the butterflies sticking out from under that panel. But it didn't matter that I got them a little crooked here, because this panel is totally going to cover all of that. And I will press it down, get it all in place, and then all I have to do is add a sentiment for my card to be done. Except what I decided to do was add also a little bit of embellishing, because I just can't stop sometimes. But clear on white is a really subtle embellishment, so it doesn't look like it's over embellished. Just using a precision bottle with a super tiny nib to do some glossy accents dots. And you can barely see them here in the finished picture of the card, but when you're holding the card in your hand, you really get that feel that there's something really beautiful added to it, that little extra detail. The colors in this are just so much fun. And I have one more angle here I wanted to show you so you can see how that shines in the light. You kind of get that almost cloudy color, that cloudiness over top of all of that coloring that was just done. So here's a couple more videos. If you feel like watching something else, click on one of those. Click on the sandyallnock.com in the upper right to get to my blog. And I will see you guys later. Take care. Bye-bye.